knowledge of space travel and have access to the food and drink of the Anunnaki. Enki shared in Lil's discontent, but Ninmah reminded them that Anu's command could not be avoided. Enki suggested that they should use the command as an opportunity for Ningazida and Dumuzi to also visit Nibiru. Ilabrat, Anu's vizier, arrived on Earth to retrieve Adapa. Before his departure, Enki instructed Adapa on royal etiquette and also told him not to eat the bread nor drink the elixir because both would cause death. Enki also advised Dumuzi and Ningazida to not succumb to the delights of their homeworld, and he also gave Ningazida a tablet to give to Anu. Once they arrived on Nibiru, they were washed, redressed, and anointed with perfumed oils, then taken to the throne room. From his throne, Anu stepped forward and embraced his grandsons. Then Ilabrat presented Adapa to the king. After confirming that Adapa could understand their speech, Anu ordered him to step forward and ask him his name and occupation. Adapa responded by giving his name and declaring he was a servant of Enki. Anu and his royal court were absolutely amazed and moved to the banquet room for a celebration. When Adapa refused to eat or drink, Anu became offended. Adapa explained that he was doing as Enki had instructed, and Anu became perplexed. Ningazida handed Anu the hidden tablet, and Anu retired to his private chamber to decipher it. In the message, Enki explained that although Adapa and Titi were of his seed, they were not endowed with the long life of the Nibiruans, and that is why Adapa was so instructed. Anu summoned Ilabrat to his chambers for advisement. Ilabrat pointed out that no rules existed for interplanetary cohabitation. He advised that Adapa should return to Earth, but Ningazida and Dumuzi should stay longer on Nibiru. Anu summoned Ningazida to his chamber and asked him if he knew that what was in the message. Ningazida said he did not, but that he had a pretty good idea because he had tested Adapa's DNA and found it was matched to Enki. Anu made the decision to send both Adapa and Ningazida back to Earth. Adapa was destined to become civilized mankind's progenitor, and Ningazida was instructed to become his teacher. Anu made an announcement to the royal court that the two would be returning to Earth, along with grains from Nibiru to cultivate. Dumuzi was ordered to stay on Nibiru for 1 shar. Once they arrived on Earth, Ningazida briefed Enki about Anu's reaction. Although he was elated that things went as expected, he was somewhat troubled about Dumuzi's detention on Nibiru. Enlil was more puzzled about Adapa's and Ningazida's prompt return to Earth and demanded that Enki and Ningazida explain what had transpired on Nibiru. Enki requested that Ninmah also be present, and after she arrived, Ningazida explained everything, including Enki's cohabitation with the Earthling females. Afterward, Enki declared that he had broken no rules, but Enlil sharply disagreed with Enki's actions. Marduk was summoned to Eridu by his mother Damkina. Marduk demanded an explanation of recent events, but Enki and Ningazida provided him only partial truth. He was impressed with Adapa and Titi, and he took a liking to their offspring. Marduk requested that he become the teacher of the 2 boys. Enlil commanded that Marduk would be the teacher of one, and that Ninurta be the teacher of the other. Ningazida remained in Eridu with Adapa and Titi and began their education. Ninurta named the firstborn of the twin boys Cain and took him to Bad Tibera, where he taught him to dig canals and till the land for sowing and reaping crops. The other brother was taken to the meadows by Marduk, where he was instructed in the ways of shepherding. He was thereafter known as Abel. After 1 shar had passed, Dumuzi returned to Earth with the essence seed of sheep and ewes and delivered them to Enki. In contemplating what course to take with the 4-legged animals from Nibiru, it was decided that a house of fashioning should be established at the landing place in the Cedar Mountains. Thus began the multiplying of grains and ewes. After the first crops were reaped and the first sheep matured, Enlil proclaimed a celebration of first. Both Cain and Abel placed their offerings at the feet of Enki and Enlil. Enlil gave a joyful blessing to both brothers, but Enki seemed impressed only with Abel. Cain was greatly aggrieved by this and further offended by Abel's boasting. While Abel bragged that the Anunnaki were more impressed with his efforts, Cain argued that it was his fields that made the birds multiply and his canals where the fish were abundant. The 2 brothers continued to argue throughout the entire winter. Once summer arrived, a drought caused the meadows to dry and pastures to dwindle. Cain drove his flocks into Abel's fields, and this ultimately caused a physical confrontation between the two. During the altercation, Cain repeatedly struck Abel in the head with a stone. When Cain saw Abel's blood gushing, he realized that he had killed his brother. Titi had a premonition of the killing and informed Adapa. The two set out for Eridu to find the twins. Eventually, they found Cain sitting next to his dead brother. Once Adapa returned to Eridu, he informed Enki of what had transpired, causing Enki to become furious. Enki banished Cain from the Eden and ordered the Anunnaki custom of burial to be carried out with Abel's body. Cain was brought to Eridu for judgment, where Enki planned to pronounce his sentence of exile, but Marduk demanded that Cain be sentenced to death. Ninurta argued that the matter should be put before the seven who judge. This suggestion greatly angered Marduk, but Enki spoke to him privately and advised him that they should not compound the agony. Enki explained to Marduk the whole truth about Cain and Abel's bloodline, and that executing Cain would threaten what had been achieved thus far. Enki appealed to his son to let the line of Adapa to survive, and Marduk agreed. It was pronounced, quote, "Eastward to a land of wandering, for his evil deed Cain must depart, that his life must be spared, he and his generations shall be distinguished," end quote. With his sister/spouse, Awan, Cain departed the Eden to set out to the land of wandering. After the death of Abel and the expulsion of Cain, the Anunnaki decided that Adapa and Titi needed to bear more offspring in order to take their place. After bearing many daughters, in the 95th Shar they finally gave birth to a son named Sati, meaning he who life binds. In all, Adapa and Titi bore 30 sons and 30 daughters. In the 97th Shar, Sati and his spouse Azura had a son named Enshi, meaning master of humanity. He was taught the secrets of the Anunnaki by Adapa, Nannar, and Ishkar. Enshi espoused his sister Nome, who bore a son named Kunin. In Bad Tibera, he was tutored in the operation and use of the furnace and kiln. He learned how to use bitumens to make fire and how to smelt and refine metal. In the 99th Shar, Kunin had a son with his half-sister Mulit and named him Malalu, meaning he who plays. In the 100th Shar, Malalu and his spouse Duna had a son named Irid, meaning he of sweet waters. Dumuzi taught Irid how to dig wells in the meadows to provide water to the flocks. At the end of the 102nd Shar, Irid and his spouse Baraka had a son named Enkimu, to whom Enki took a liking and mentored. Enkimu was intensely educated on celestial matters and was eager to explore the heavens. Enkimu was sent to meet with Marduk at the landing place and departed from there on a trip to the moon. When Enkimu returned to Earth, he was sent to the place of the chariots in Sippar to be with Utu. Enkimu was installed as a prince of earthlings and taught the functions of priesthood. In the 104th Shar, Enkimu and his spouse Edeni had a son named Methuselah, meaning who by the bright waters raised. After the birth of his son, Enkimu went on his second journey to the heavens with Marduk. This time they visited the Igigi on Lamu. The tablet explains that Enkimu spent the rest of his days in the heavens making a record of all that he had learned. He passed this record down to his sons Methuselah, Ragam, and Gadad to study and abide by. Methuselah and his spouse Ednot had a son named Lamech, meaning mighty man. During Lamech's time, things had become much harsher in the fields and meadows. It was also during this time that Adapa's death approached. Adapa requested that all of his sons and the sons of his sons assemble themselves before him. When everyone had gathered, Adapa noticed his firstborn son Cain was absent and requested for him to be fetched. Sati asked Lord Enki what should be done, and in turn Enki summoned Ninurta to bring Cain to Adapa's deathbed. When Cain arrived, Adapa requested for he and Sati to come before him. Adapa put his right hand on the head of Sati and said, quote, "Of your seed shall the earth be filled, and of your seed as a tree with 3 branches mankind, a great calamity shall survive," end quote. He then put his left hand on the head of Cain and said, quote, "For your sin of your birthright you are deprived, but of your seed 7 nations shall come. In a realm set apart they shall survive. Distant lands they shall inhabit, but having your brother with a stone killed, by a stone will be your end." End quote. After Adapa died, his body was wrapped in cloth and buried in a cave by the banks of the river. Adapa had been born in the middle of the 93rd Shar and died by the end of the 108th. After his father's death, Cain returned to the land of wandering, where he began building a city for his sons and daughters. As he was building, by a falling stone he was killed. During the days of Lamech, the hardships on earth were increasing. Likewise, Lamu was becoming a dry and dusty planet. Enlil, Enki, and Ninmah met to determine what was causing the conditions on earth in Lamu. In the Abzu, they installed observatory instruments, and Nergal and his spouse Ereshkigal were put in charge. Ninurta was assigned to establish a bond heaven-earth in the mountain land. Marduk was given the task of pacifying the Igigi on Lamu. During their meeting, Enki and Enlil and Ninmah reflected on how much they had aged over the last 100-plus Shars. They considered if it were time for them to return to Nibiru, as they had planned many times before. They wondered what it was exactly that made them age so much while on Earth. Ultimately, they decided to stay and see what transpired. It came to pass soon thereafter, Marduk came to his father, Enki, and expressed his desire to choose a bride. When Marduk revealed that he desired to marry a descendant of Adapa, Enki was astounded he had chosen an earthling. Marduk pointed out that technically he was not an earthling, but his own offspring, a daughter of Enki-Me named Sarpanit. Enki summoned Ninki, and Marduk restated his desire to his mother. Ninki asked Marduk if Sarpanit appreciated his affection, and he answered in the affirmative. Enki was more concerned with the fact that Marduk would forsake his princely rights on Nibiru with such an act. Marduk bitterly responded by stating that his rights on Nibiru were non-existent, and that even on Earth his rights as firstborn had been trampled. His parents were in agreement. Enki and Ninki summoned Methuselah and informed him of Marduk's desire to marry his sister. Methuselah was humbled and overjoyed at the same time. On the contrary, when Enlil was told of the decision, he was consumed with fury, and Ninmah was greatly disappointed. Enlil contacted Anu and conveyed his contempt for Marduk's decision. Anu's counsel, but when Ninki proposed the wedding occur in Eridu, Enlil announced that Marduk could not stay in the Eden afterward. Enki suggested to Enlil to give Marduk and his wife a domain of their own above the Abzu in what eventually became known as Egypt, and Enlil agreed. A great multitude of earthlings assembled in Eridu for the wedding ceremony. Even 200 Igigi from Lamu showed up, but they were not really there for the party as it turns out. The leaders of Earth did not realize the true intent of the Igigi was to abduct and conjugate with the female earthlings. Discontent had been brewing among the Igigi on Lamu for a long time, and when Marduk was given permission to marry an earthling, they decided it was time for action. One named Shamgaz had become sort of their union leader, and they wanted equal rights to marry and have children. Once the ceremony concluded, Shamgaz gave a prearranged signal, and each one of the Igigi abducted an earth female and returned to the landing place where they established a stronghold. When Marduk was urged to retake charge of the Igigi, he admitted that he agreed with their position. While Enki and Ninmah begrudgingly agreed, Enlil was absolutely enraged. He said, quote, "One evil deed by another has been followed. Fornication from Enki and Marduk the Igigi have adopted. Our pride and sacred mission to the winds have been abandoned. By our own hands, this planet with earthling multitudes shall be overrun." End quote. Enlil ordered the Igigi and their females back to Lamu, but Marduk informed him that survival on Mars was no longer possible. Enlil then declared that they could not stay in the Eden and left the gathering in disgust. It was at this point in time that Enlil began plotting against Marduk and the earthlings. The Igigi and their females became secluded in the Cedar Mountains, where they bore children who became known as the children of the rocket ships. Marduk and Sarpanit also had children, and the first two sons were named Ashar and Satu. Marduk had built 2 cities for his sons and invited the Igigi to come live in his domain. Some of the Igigi took Marduk's invitation, and others stayed at the landing platform, including Shamgaz. Ninurta had been observing Marduk's moves and asked his father Enlil what was Marduk's scheme. Enlil warned that the earth would be inherited by the earthlings. Enlil instructed Ninurta to find the offspring of Cain and to prepare his own domain. Once Ninurta located Cain's offspring on the other side of the world, he taught them how to make tools and engage in mining and smelting. He taught them how to build seaworthy rafts and guided them to a new land where they established a city with twin towers. Back in Eden, Lumok and his wife Badanash were enforcing the work quotas and ration reductions of the Earthlings. Badanash was an outstanding beauty, and Enki basically had a crush on her. Enki had Marduk summon Lumok to his domain. While Lumok was away, Enki had Badanash brought to Ninma's house in Shurabak, where he soon after showed up and subsequently impregnated her. Lumok was summoned back to the Eden upon the news of him having a new son. He immediately counseled with his father Methuselah about the odd appearance of his so-called son. Methuselah demanded an answer from Badanash, as he suspected the father to be one of the Igigi. She denied that the offspring was one of an Igigi, and Methuselah consoled Lumok, saying that the boy was an omen with a unique destiny. He explained that Lumok's son was a sign that respite was coming to those of earth, and he should so be named. The boy was named Sasudra, meaning he of long bright life days, and was raised in Shurabak. Both Ninma and Enki greatly adored the child, teaching him the writings of Adapa and priestly rites. Once Sasudra was grown, he married Imzara, and they had 3 sons. During this time, the sufferings on earth intensified. As a result of the actions of the Igigi and Marduk, Enlil was greatly disturbed and distraught. He believed that the Anunnaki mission to earth had become perverted, causing plagues and pestilence. Both Enki and Ninma suggested that they teach the earthlings healing and canal building, but Enlil forbade them from doing so. For over 3 shars, the earthlings continued to suffer. Eventually, the celestial anomalies caused even the Anunnaki to become concerned about their own rations and well-being. It was determined that the Creator of all was angry and was returning the heavens to the primordial days, which would cause a great deluge on earth. It was decided that both Earth and Lamu would be evacuated. A fleet of fast celestial chariots was dispatched to Earth from Nibiru. Aboard one of the ships was a white-haired Anunnaki named Galzu, meaning Great Knower. Galzu was the messenger of Anu and summoned all to Nibruki, including Enki and Ninma, once he arrived on Earth. He explained that they had studied the health of those Anunnaki who had returned to Nibiru, and that the adverse effects would result in death if they tried to go home. Thus, Galzu conveyed a secret command to Enki, Ninma, and Enlil that they were to wait out the calamity in orbit above Earth. The rest of the Anunnaki could decide whether they wanted to stay in orbit or to go to Nibiru. Furthermore, the Igigi that espoused Earthlings were not allowed to go to Nibiru. An exception was made for Marduk, but not Sarpanit. Enlil summoned a council of Anunnaki and Igigi to Nibruki and informed them of Galzu's instructions. Ninurta and Ishkur announced they would stay with their father Enlil. Nanner, Enki's firstborn, expressed a desire to wait it out on the moon, and a puzzled Enki and Enlil agreed. Nanner's children, Utu and Inanna, announced they would stay in orbit. Marduk defiantly pronounced he would stay with Sarpanit and the Igigi. Enki's other children, Nergal, Gibel, Ningal, Ningazita, and Dumuzi, all declared their intent to wait it out in orbit. And finally, Ninma announced with pride her choice to stay and not abandon the earthlings she helped create. Enlil angrily proclaimed that the earth abominations should perish. Enki shouted in response that the being created by them must be saved. Enlil unloaded on Enki, saying, quote, "From the very beginning, at every turn, the decisions by you modified were, to primitive workers procreating you gave, to them knowing you endowed. The powers of the Creator of all into your hands you have taken. Thereafter, even that by abominations you fouled. With fornication Adapa you conceived, understanding to his line you gave. His offspring to the heavens you have taken, our wisdom with them you shared. Every rule you have broken, decisions and command you ignored. Because of you, by a civilized earthling brother, a brother murdered. Because of Marduk, your son, the Agigi like him, with earthlings intermarried. Who is lordly from Nibiru, to whom the earth alone belongs? To no one is no longer known. Enough, enough to all that I say. The abominations cannot continue. Now that a calamity by a destiny unknown has been ordained, let what must happen, happen. End quote. Enlil then demanded all those present to solemnly swear an oath of secrecy. Enlil's side quickly acknowledged, followed slowly by Enki's side. When it came to Enki, he asked Enlil why he even bothered to ask for such an oath, because there was apparently nothing he could do to stop the forthcoming events anyway. Then he left the assembly with Marduk in tow. Upon their departure, Enlil explained the logistics of the evacuation plan. Once those headed for Nibiru had left, Marduk and the Agigi with earthling wives gathered at the landing place where Marduk gave them the chance to either go to Lamu or to the distant mountain lands of Earth. Enlil assigned Ninurta to the mountain lands beyond the oceans. Nergal and Irish-Kigal were sent to report from the White Land, and Ishkir was tasked with barring access by the Earthlings to Sippar. Enlil also moved the Tablet of Destinies from Nibriki to Sippar. As the group awaited the approach of Nibiru, which would in turn trigger the calamity, they all grew apprehensive. During this period, Enki explained to his sister Ninmah that Enlil's anger with the Earthlings had caused him to ignore the other living creatures on the planet. He suggested that they should preserve their seed of life for safekeeping, and she agreed. Ningazita aided Enki in collecting the essences and life eggs of the indigenous animals 2 by 2. Soon thereafter, Ninurta, Nergal, and Irish-Kigal announced the deluge was upon them.